Chapter 1. The Unexpected Visitor. The hum of ancient air conditioning units was the only sound accompanying Dr. Mira Jensen as she hunched over her console in the dimly lit lab. Outside, the Colorado sky churned with unseasonal storms, gray and heavy, matching the tension in the air. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, pulling up graphs that made no sense. "These readings can't be right," she muttered, her voice a whisper against the static buzz of her equipment. For weeks, the ionosphere had been spiking with anomalies, fluctuations too regular to be natural. Tonight, however, the data screamed urgency. A sudden, high-pitched chirp from her terminal shattered the quiet. Mira jolted upright, her coffee sloshing dangerously close to the edge of the desk. She adjusted her glasses and leaned in. The screen displayed something new, a repeating signal, faint yet unmistakably intentional. "What the hell?" she murmured. Her heart raced as she clicked on the waveform. The signal wasn't just noise. It was language, alien in rhythm but mathematically precise. Before she could fully comprehend, the lab lights flickered. The storm outside intensified, thunder cracking like a cosmic whip. Then, just as quickly, silence. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the entire atmosphere was holding its breath. Myra's eyes darted to the monitor tracking weather patterns. A dense cluster of electromagnetic interference had appeared, sitting unnaturally stationary in the upper atmosphere. Her gut twisted. This wasn't a glitch. Her radio crackled to life. "Unidentified object entering controlled airspace," a robotic voice intoned. "Designate unknown entity." Mira froze. It wasn't possible. No spacecraft, human or otherwise, could remain stable at such an altitude during a storm like this. She grabbed the comm unit. "Dr. Jensen to NORAD. This is Mira Jensen at Site 12. I think I've picked up something not from here. Can you confirm?" Static answered her for a moment before a curt voice cut through. "Site 12, your observations are consistent with ours. Unidentified object detected. Maintain radio silence until further notice." The line went dead, leaving her alone with the implications. Her chest tightened. Mira wasn't one for paranoia, but she also wasn't naive. If NORAD was clamming up, this wasn't a satellite malfunction. A new sound filled the room, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Mira whipped around, searching for its source, but it wasn't coming from her equipment. It was external. The ceiling above her shimmered, rippling like heat waves on asphalt. Then, without warning, a beam of golden light shot through, striking the floor. Mira shielded her eyes, heart hammering, as a figure materialized within the glow. It wasn't human. The being stood tall, its silhouette sleek and symmetrical. Its skin, or armor, gleamed like molten silver, reflecting the dim light of the lab. Its elongated face bore a calm, yet dispassionate expression, eyes glowing faintly blue. Mira stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. "Greetings," the figure said. Its voice was smooth, musical, yet devoid of warmth. "You are Dr. Mira Jensen, are you not?" Mira gawked, her voice failing her. "I am Ian Cartar," the figure continued, bowing slightly. "Representative of the Nebulan Syndicate. I believe I have you to thank for drawing my attention. Your signal was inventive for a species at your stage." "Stage?" Mira finally croaked, gripping the edge of her desk to steady herself. "Primitive," Ian replied, tilting his head. He gestured to the storm visible through the window. "Though your atmosphere is fascinating, unpredictable, chaotic, it nearly disrupted my vessel's entry." Myra's fear gave way to irritation. "If we're so primitive, why are you here?" Ian's lips, if they could be called that, curved into something resembling a smirk. "I'm here to trade. Your planet possesses resources of value to my syndicate, and I offer technology far beyond your imagining in return." "Trade?" Mira repeated, narrowing her eyes. "Indeed." Ian's tone was confident, rehearsed. "Your leaders may find the proposition mutually beneficial." Myra's mind raced. "Resources? What resources? And why approach her of all people?" "I don't speak for Earth," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You'll have to go through proper channels." Ian's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, an unmistakable sign of displeasure. Your channels are inefficient. Time is of the essence. You, Doctor, are far more direct. Your work with atmospheric phenomena, remarkable for someone so limited. Mira bristled, but held her tongue. Ian stepped closer, his metallic form gliding rather than walking. I will demonstrate the value of my offerings. Then you will facilitate negotiations. And if I refuse, she challenged, crossing her arms despite the quiver in her stomach. Ian's smirk returned, colder this time. Refusal would be regrettable. For both of us. Before Mira could respond, her monitors erupted with activity. Data streamed in chaotic bursts, lines spiking erratically. Her console blared alarms as atmospheric pressure surged. "What are you doing?" she demanded, panic creeping into her voice. "Enhancing my signal," Ian said, unfazed. "I require an anchor point for communication. Your planet's storms are inconvenient but adaptable." Myra's jaw tightened. Her work was nothing more than a tool to him. "You can't just hijack our atmosphere," she snapped. Ian regarded her coolly. "Doctor, I can and I have. It would be wise to cooperate. Your species has much to gain." Myra's fists clenched. "And if we lose?" Ian's glowing eyes flickered. "That depends on your choices." The golden light enveloped him once more, and he vanished, leaving Mira alone in the charged silence of her lab. Her gaze shifted to the storm outside, its fury intensifying. One thing was clear: Earth had an uninvited guest, and Mira wasn't about to let him take anything without a fight. Chapter 2: The Bargain. The hologram materialized without warning, cutting through the dim glow of Myra's lab. It cast golden light on every surface, illuminating her cluttered desk and outdated monitors. Ian Carter's towering figure stood in perfect clarity, a shimmering projection too vivid to be ignored. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer," Ian said, his voice a resonant mix of calm and authority. Mira tensed. Her hands clenched the edge of the desk as she steadied herself. "I didn't realize extortion was part of intergalactic diplomacy." Ian tilted his head, the faint blue glow of his eyes intensifying. "Extortion? Such a primitive interpretation. I am a traitor, Dr. Jensen, not a conqueror. My offer is equitable. Resistance only delays your advancement." Mira inhaled sharply. "Equitable? You didn't ask. You're taking what you want." Ian's expression shifted, his features betraying the slightest hint of irritation. "If I intended to take, your atmosphere would already be harvested. I am offering your species a chance to ascend beyond its limits." "You're offering scraps," she snapped, her voice rising. "A fair trade on your terms. What do you want from us, really?" The hologram flared briefly, a ripple of energy that sent a faint hum through the lab. Ian stepped closer, his projection towering over her. "You presume much for someone so young in the grand expanse of time. Your planet contains unique elements, rare isotopes within your upper atmosphere. These are essential to stabilizing advanced cloaking technologies. Without them, my vessel is stranded in this sector." Myra's mind raced. Rare isotopes in the ionosphere? It explained the anomalies and why his ship lingered in such a volatile environment. But the implications made her stomach churn. "And if you strip them away? What happens to our atmosphere? Our weather systems?" she demanded. Ian hesitated. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough for Mira to catch. "Insignificant disruptions," he said finally. "Your species will adapt, as it always has. Consider the advancements you'll gain in exchange. Energy systems beyond your wildest dreams. Medicine to eradicate your most persistent diseases. Technology to rival the stars." "At what cost?" she muttered, her voice heavy with skepticism. Ian's eyes narrowed. "The cost is irrelevant when weighed against survival. Humanity's future lies in this decision, Dr. Jensen. Do not squander it." Before Mira could respond, her assistant Jake burst into the room, panting, his face pale. "Mira, the satellites, we've lost 3 feeds. Something's interfering with orbital stability." She turned sharply to her monitors, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The data confirmed Jake's panic. Atmospheric density around the object. Ian's ship was spiking dramatically. "He's doing this," she whispered, fury igniting in her chest. Ian's projection remained calm, observing the exchange with an air of detachment. "A minor adjustment. Stabilizing my vessel requires certain conditions. Your instruments are collateral." Mira whirled to face him. "Collateral? You're destabilizing our satellites and calling it minor? You're already affecting the planet, and you expect us to trust you?" Ian regarded her coolly. "Your mistrust is an emotional response, not a rational one. I expected more from a mind like yours." Myra's glare could have cut through steel. "You don't get to decide what's rational for us. Earth isn't a resource depot for your convenience." Jake, still catching his breath, gestured to the storm outside. "Mira looks." She turned toward the window, where the clouds roiled like an angry sea. Bolts of lightning arced unnaturally, connecting in precise, web-like patterns. The storm was no longer random. It was controlled. "You're manipulating the weather now?" Myra's voice cracked with disbelief. "Merely harnessing it," Ian replied, as if discussing a simple experiment. "The isotopes respond to electrical charge. Your storms provide an ideal extraction medium." Myra's mind churned with possibilities. If Ian's vessel depended on their atmosphere, it was vulnerable, anchored. But how could she use that to her advantage? "Jake, run a simulation," she said abruptly, her voice sharp with resolve. "If the isotopes are integral to his systems, what happens if we disrupt the charge patterns? Create interference?" Jake's eyes widened. "You're thinking of turning the storm against him?" Ian's projection flickered slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Dr. Jensen, you misunderstand your position. Resistance would not end well for your species." "Maybe not," she shot back, "but we've resisted everything else that's tried to break us. You're no different." Jake tapped furiously at the keyboard, muttering under his breath. Mira kept her gaze locked on Ian, her expression unyielding. "You think yourself clever," Ian said, his voice now tinged with disdain. "But you fail to see the greater picture. My patience is finite. Decide wisely, Doctor, or I will make the choice for you." The projection blinked out, leaving the lab in tense silence. Mira exhaled shakily and turned to Jake. "Did you get it?" Jake nodded, his face pale but determined. "I think so. If we can amplify certain frequencies, we might disrupt his extraction process, maybe even damage his systems." "Good," Mira said, straightening. "Let's make sure he knows Earth isn't an easy target." Outside, the storm intensified, the sky alive with fury. Myra's resolve hardened as she stared into the chaos. Ian Kartar might have advanced technology, but he'd underestimated one thing: humanity's relentless drive to fight back. Chapter 3: The Turning Point. The storm outside was no longer a natural phenomenon. It was a battlefield. Forked lightning carved across the sky, its sharp illumination highlighting the unnerving precision of the weather's patterns. Mira stood at her station, the hum of machinery and the frenetic beeping of sensors filling the lab. Jake's fingers danced over the keyboard beside her, the screen reflecting his furrowed brow. "Amplifiers ready," Jake said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we boost the ion pulse here," he jabbed at the screen, "it should disrupt the isotopic siphoning process. At least temporarily." "Good. Patch it through the primary array," Mira said, brushing her damp hair out of her face. Her adrenaline surged, every movement sharp and purposeful. As Jake worked, Mira stole a glance at the monitor displaying real-time satellite feeds. The storm's epicenter had stabilized directly over Ian Kartar's vessel, a monolithic shadow suspended like an ominous moon above the Earth's surface. Her stomach tightened. They were running out of time. The lab lights flickered. For a moment, everything went dark, the only illumination coming from the crackling storm outside. When the power returned, Ian's hologram stood in the center of the lab once more, its form distorted by a faint shimmer of static. "You persist in defiance, Dr. Jensen," Ian said, his tone colder than before. "This will not end well for you or your people." "Funny," Mira replied, not looking up from her work. "I could say the same to you." Ian's eyes glowed brighter, his irritation evident even through the projection. You've chosen to escalate unnecessarily. My patience is at its limit. Good, Mira said, her voice sharp. She turned to face him, her resolve steely. Because so is ours. Ian tilted his head slightly. You're gambling with forces beyond your comprehension. And you're underestimating us, Mira countered. Jake interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. Mira, it's ready. She nodded, her eyes never leaving Ian's hologram. Then let's give our guest a proper Earth welcome. Jake pressed a series of keys, and a low-frequency hum filled the lab. On the monitor, the storm responded almost immediately, its chaotic lightning converging into a focused, blinding arc that struck Ian's ship with unrelenting fury. Ian's hologram faltered, flickering erratically. His calm demeanor cracked, his voice rising above the electric din. What have you done? Rewired your storm, Mira said, a satisfied edge in her tone. You might want to check your ship's systems. The projection vanished abruptly, leaving a palpable silence in its wake. Did it work? Jake asked, his voice shaky. Mira leaned over the monitor, watching the data scroll across the screen. The isotopic siphoning had halted, and energy readings from Ian's vessel were erratic. Sparks of triumph flickered within her, but she forced herself to stay focused. His systems are disrupted, but not for long, she said. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to figure out our next move. As if on cue, the lab's communication array crackled to life. A deep, unfamiliar voice boomed through the speakers, its tone commanding and laced with authority. Humans of Earth, this is Commander Ian Cartar. You have made your defiance clear. If you will not cooperate, I will proceed with full force. Prepare yourselves. The message ended, leaving a heavy stillness. Jake swallowed hard. That doesn't sound good. No, it doesn't, Mira said grimly. Her mind raced, calculating possibilities. If he's going to use full force, he'll need to stabilize his systems first. That means he's vulnerable right now. Jake frowned. What are you thinking? Mira grabbed a tablet, her fingers flying as she pulled up schematics and storm data. We need to hit him where it hurts. His power source relies on those isotopes, right? If we can neutralize the surrounding energy fields entirely, we might be able to shut his ship down. Neutralize how? Jake asked. Mira hesitated, her gaze flickering to the storm outside. We use a counterfrequency, an inversion pulse. It'll create a localized energy vacuum. His systems won't be able to stabilize. Jake stared at her, his face pale. That kind of pulse could fry everything in a 100-mile radius. Our grid, communications, everything. I know, Mira said quietly. Her voice softened, but her eyes burned with determination. But it's a choice between that and letting him strip our atmosphere. We have to take the risk. Jake hesitated, then nodded. All right, let's do it. The two worked in tense silence, the storm's fury outside serving as both a warning and a motivator. Minutes passed like hours as they configured the pulse generator, every adjustment critical. Finally, Jake leaned back, his hands trembling. It's ready. Mira took a deep breath and stepped toward the control panel. Her hand hovered over the activation switch, her chest tight with the weight of the decision. You're sure about this? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No, she admitted, but we don't have another choice. With a resolute nod, she pressed the switch. The lab plunged into a deafening silence as the pulse generator activated. Outside, the storm collapsed inward, its energy funneling into a single, blinding point. The sky erupted in a cascade of light, and then everything went still. When the power returned moments later, Mira staggered to her feet and looked at the monitor. Ian's ship was dark, its energy readings non-existent. Jake exhaled shakily. Did we? We stopped him, Mira said, though her voice was tinged with exhaustion. For now. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 4: Unity and Defiance. The air in the lab was heavy with the scent of ozone, the lingering echo of the storm pressing on Myra's chest like a weight. The monitors displayed the alien vessel, now a lifeless husk in the sky. Yet Mira felt no relief. Ian Cartar wasn't a figure to underestimate, and her instinct screamed that this wasn't over. Jake leaned against the table, his face pale and sweat slicked. That worked, but what now? We can't assume he's just gone? Myra's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. She could see the faint flickers of light sparking in the depths of the alien ship, small but persistent. He's not gone, she murmured. He's regrouping. Jake groaned, rubbing his temples. Then we're back to square one, except now half the city's power grid is toast. The communication console crackled to life again, and this time, Ian's voice was stripped of its earlier restraint. It was no longer the cold, methodical tone of an advanced being. It was raw and furious. You continue to surprise, Earthling. Few have managed to push me this far. A pause, heavy with menace. But your defiance has only delayed the inevitable. You have gambled everything on the hope that I will give up. I will show you the folly of such a gamble. Myra's jaw clenched. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her. This isn't a gamble, Ian. It's a statement. We're not giving you this planet without a fight. The alien's laughter was chilling, the sound reverberating through the speakers like a seismic tremor. Fight all you wish. You cannot fathom what you are up against. The signal cut off, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. Jake turned to Mira, his eyes wide with desperation. We can't keep this up, Mira. He's right. We're out of options. She grabbed his shoulder, forcing him to meet her gaze. We're never out of options. We just need to think. Suddenly, the monitor displayed new activity. The alien vessel's core was reactivating, its energy spikes climbing rapidly. Myra's heart raced as she analyzed the data. He's deploying something, she said, her voice grim. It's not the siphoning system. It's something else, something bigger. Jake's voice cracked. What could be bigger than stripping the atmosphere? Myra's fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed archived readings from earlier encounters. Her face paled as the pieces fell into place. He's stabilizing a quantum anchor. If he finishes, he won't just strip Earth's resources. He'll fold the planet into his dimension entirely. Jake's face went slack. You mean? He'll take everything, Mira finished. Earth will be gone. The lab fell into a tense silence as the reality of their predicament set in. Jake broke it first, his voice low but resolute. Then we stop him, no matter what it takes. Mira nodded, her resolve hardening. We need to overload his systems again, but this time we can't just disrupt him. We have to destroy the core entirely. Jake frowned. But how? We don't have anything strong enough to. The atmospheric charge, Mira interrupted, her eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. The storm is still active. If we can channel all that energy directly into his core. Jake hesitated. You're talking about turning the planet's natural forces into a weapon. That's insane, Mira. What if it backfires? She turned to him, her expression unyielding. If we don't try, there won't be a planet left to backfire on. The next moments were a blur of focused preparation. Mira and Jake synchronized their efforts, calibrating the lab's equipment to redirect the storm's energy. They worked in near silence, the only sounds the hum of machinery and the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, Mira stepped back from the console, her chest heaving. It's ready. Jake gave her a weak smile. Let's hope Earth's fury is enough to handle this. Mira activated the system, and the lab vibrated as the equipment surged to life. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning converging into a single, devastating bolt aimed directly at Ian's ship. The impact was instantaneous. The alien vessel erupted in a cascade of energy, its hull disintegrating under the onslaught. The quantum anchor flickered and failed, the dimensional rift collapsing in on itself. In the lab, the monitors went dark, the storm outside dissipating as quickly as it had formed. For a long moment, there was only silence. Jake slumped into a chair, his voice barely above a whisper. Did we do it? Mira stared at the now empty sky on the screen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. We did it, she said, though the weight of their victory pressed heavily on her shoulders. As the two sat in the quiet aftermath, the faint glow of dawn began to filter through the shattered windows. The Earth had survived, but Mira knew this wasn't the end. Humanity had made a statement, one that would echo across the stars. we fight for our home.